Hello, everybody. What is going on? Welcome to another Thursday BGH Connect live stream. I'm really excited. Sorry about last week. I was unwell, so we will be getting Bob on the next week's episode, July 27th. Yeah, so that will be the next episode here. But we're not talking to Bob today. We are talking to Sam McDavitt, and we are talking about multi-use cards and game design and balance and all those fun things. Sam, welcome to the show.
How's it going, Devin? Thanks for having me.
Good. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I'm stuck inside, but it looks beautiful outside, so hoping to get some fresh air this afternoon.
Yes, of course. I feel like I'm stuck inside all the time. It's like as soon as we're done here, I'm gonna go outside and work on a rule book because it's just like I can't be stuck in here any longer. But TK has joined already. TK says love multi-use cards. Yes, I'm really excited to chat with that because I have a couple games in mind that use multi-use cards, and I know a few of us here are also very interested in that. So before we dive into anything, Sam, can you tell us who you are a little bit? Personally, and tell us a little bit how you got into the game design side of things.
Yeah, can do. So I am Sam McDavid, and I'm from the New England area. I've kind of grown up, kind of surrounded by a family that would always try and get one more card game in before going to school, and so games have kind of been sort of that impetus that I've always been kind of around. And then I don't know. I went off to boarding school and had a dorm parent who, during the check-in process, like during the weeknights when you had to check in for study hall, had Carcassonne out one night on like the floor, and he was playing against his girlfriend at the time. And so, after study hall that one night, I kind of just jumped in and was like, hey, what is this? And kind of laid dormant till I met my fiance, Michaela, 4+ years ago now, where we kind of connected over the fact that I used to collect HeroScape but never played it growing up. And
Love it.
one thing led to another and started with Santorini. And now, as you can see behind me, we big into like the gaming aspect of things. And so right around, I want to say like the start of the lockdown,
Mhm.
um, it was sort of a coping mechanism
Yeah.
where it was, uh, you know, I have a creative background where I went to school for an industrial design and worked in product development over 6 years now. And so it was like, this isn't too far off if I find like the bug that catches it, and it sort
Mhm.
of started snowballing from there.
Awesome. I love that you just found there's just a game on the floor, and you're like, let's play, and then that's how it started. That's a unique story. Like most people, it's just like we started with Monopoly, obviously, and then we just had a friend that did this, and that's awesome to hear. And Santorini, I think I've played that once or twice. I was terrible at it. It was a really cool abstract game though, but like I was just so bad. I was just like,
Yeah, it was. I'm sure the story is not too unsimilar from others. Is like, so I taught Michaela Carcassonne, and we were playing the app, and then I just
mm,
a quick Google of like good games to play at 2 player, and right around that 2019 period, um, Santorini was hot in the streets.
that's awesome. Well, so game design. So like, can you describe the process up to like your first step into game design and where you're at now, like with your game Everstone? What was that process like, and how did that feel going through all that?
So it's very like vague in terms of like the beginning of how like I jumped in, other than I don't know. It's always been maybe like the as like a gamer, not even like the designer portion of it. I with a reading disability like theme and all that have never really like resonated with me. But
Mm,
as like I started playing more and more games, like the surprise of how well things could mesh, specifically games that use like minimal components, it always like attracted me. And I think it was just sort of like the when you create a budget to keep saving and you can't buy all these games. It's like,
mm-hmm.
well, maybe like test our hand at like tweak and modify. I think there's a ton of like backstories that you've heard from other designers. I think Jamie Stegmaier is popping into my head of like just taking games that you've played and putting your own twist on it.
Yeah.
Is sort of a similar start that I had, and then it kind of transitioned into. I felt like there was a mechanic that wasn't new or revolutionary, but I had stumbled across the harvest mechanic, which is kind of the only thing that's stuck with Everstone, where it just felt fun to play, and so I just continued to like build upon that. And so I know Gabe's book that is on Kickstarter right now, Find the Fun. That's really kind of what it came down to. Of like, I just enjoyed playing it and felt comfortable enough to start showing off to other people, and they had
Mm.
the same reception. And the positive encouragement kind of can be contagious in terms of like especially creative pursuits.
Yeah, I remember my first entry into the design idea is, you know, my mom sent me a picture like last month, and she's like, "You've been wanting to do this since you were a kid," and I was like, "Wait, what?" And she sent me a picture of, I was on a little piece of paper. I wrote, like, I used to do tournaments with Power Rangers and stuff like that. I was writing stats down and like everything back when then I was a kid, and so I was like, okay, let's try something. And I found King of Tokyo and playing that game, and I was like, oh, I want to make my own expansion. I was gonna make my own characters. Well, punch kick block, my game came out of that. Like, that's where it started, and then now that's coming out probably next year. So it's
Awesome.
really cool how we like start, because it's like everyone starts in their own specific way, and I didn't expect to get into game design 3 years ago. Um, so is that like, I know you talked about for a while you had career in product engineering, or was it product
So the degree's in industrial design, but it's
industrial?
basically it was a glorified project manager was sort of my
Okay,
last job.
got it. So is that like board games have that always been in the back of your mind of like, I want to design and publish board games, or was that because of the lockdown?
Uh I'm sure like if you asked like different people in my life, they might like disagree with me, but I I don't think I really understood that it was something I wanted to move forward with
Mm,
until I read the book Principles of Success. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. I believe it's Jack Canfield that's the writer. I can definitely get the information on it later if anyone's curious.
yeah.
But it started to like it basically defining talks about defining what success is and what people like what intrinsically it means to you. And in chapter 2 they just have you build out a list of 20 things that like bring you happiness, and like I think 18 of them were like centered around like game adjacent things.
Mm,
And it it began to kind of just morph into that thing of you know I feel like everyone gets like if you increase your level of game like being a gamer where you get like past like the family games and things like that. You kind of go through these different paths of like wanting to find some sort of niche
yeah.
in your life around it. And like the content creation of like posting pictures and like it the designing was sort of just where it felt happiness and where I'd get lost in. And
Mm.
so it sort of just kind of fell into that. I don't know if that really answers the question, but
No, I think that totally answers the question. I mean, for that's like my favorite part of it as well. It's just like, that's why I share so much about my process, because that's fun to me. It's like there's a lot of designers out there, they're more vulnerable or not vulnerable enough, and they just like, they keep it all inside and they don't necessarily want to bring it out, and then they have a hard time communicating their game and their, product and stuff like that. And that's part of the reason. I mean, because like, that's why community is so great. That's why, like, start sharing your process, sharing what you do, and then we can go forward and have a better design in the long term. So, well, let's get
and
into
I
the topic today here. Go
perfect.
ahead. What were you gonna say?
Well, I was just saying like some of the rewarding parts. I don't know if TK is still in like the audience right now, but one of the coolest parts is like when you play test with other designers and like-minded people behind the scene,
Hmm.
and you show them that like like TK was able to like inspire not something for this game. He helped me cut something else out of this,
Nice.
but like unlocked that next like I'm going to keep running with this for a different project. And sort of those moments where people within like that same sort of collaboration and mindset and passion, you hand it off and they're able to kind of just like immediately pick out
Right.
where the like where it's stuck, which like almost like frees up that hurdle to allow you to keep running is like
Yeah.
I think that on its own is like what rejuvenates me in the whole like community aspect, like aside from like the creating something cool is like that ability to allow others to um, bring your skill level up or your game up just by like that open sharing.
Yeah, the development process is awesome. It's like, I remember play testing with TK, and The first few games I did, and it was tough because like our playtest was really rough, and there was a lot of things that um, I shouldn't have probably play tested externally, but I was still learning. I was new, and there were so many things that they helped change, and just small things that now are going to be implemented in the final game. And because of that, like we were able to go forward, right? And he said, playtest is my number one favorite thing to do within the design community. Yeah, I mean, and they're geniuses. So like, TK, you already know. Get out of here. Um, but yeah, so let's talk about multi-use cards today because that's kind of what we're doing. I know you had a spreadsheet. Did you want to pull
Yeah,
that up?
I'll do a little like preamble first before
Yeah.
I share it. But I guess the reason I've always personally been fascinated by multi-use cards is because it allows you to do a lot with a little type of thing. Where I've always, I guess, me as a gamer have has been really into games that you open up and look at the box and like you feel like it doesn't have like an overwhelming like presence when you just look at it, where you're not like scared off by it, but like then you walk away, it's like, how did this game feel so like ones that come to mind from like we mentioned pre-show, I believe Wingspan, of
Mhm.
like the turns that come out of like the bird cards from like planning, like how you sequence them, like just don't know how to like verbalize that, but that has always intrinsically like excited me in terms of gaming.
It makes you feel so
um
powerful, like you've done so much in such a little time. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that is sort of what like started it off of like I never wanted to add more components just to add more components to games. And so multi-use cards always felt like a fun just like way to start. And so for me getting into it, a game I promised I wouldn't talk about, uh, it was using this idea of like you're drafting actions, but the cards on themselves have actions on one side or the other, and depending on how you orient it, it's like giving the action to you or the opponent. So you're like drafting like six actions in a turn, but you're only getting three of them, and you're also aware of what the opponent's three are. Was sort of my first dip
Cool.
into like combining something like two things on a card.
Mm.
And so it kind of like was the springboard for just sort of this fascination of trying to figure out how to get multiple things on a card. And so I don't have the images pulled up, but a quick kind of tying into showing off the spreadsheet, kind of two parts that, sorry if I kind of steer the conversation in a different direction, but
Go for it. This is your time.
the cards that I ended up with have uh, these are outdated, but it like there's like six different things going on to a card, which almost is too many uses for a multi-use card. Um, where I'll speed up the story time, but each card has sort of, I don't know if you can really see too well for the audience, but it's got its cost, it's got its um,
There we go.
so it's got a one-time bonus reward, which is what you'll get for selling it. You got the action that it can provide for when they're upgraded under your player board. And then on the back, which this is old art and kind of hard to see, there's a number combination and a tool available for when it's on the top of the deck. Is kind of like that end game surprise of
Mm.
kind of what ended up with the cards. I didn't even share, but there's also like a bonus that you get if you end up just discarding it and not repairing it. Um, was sort of like my kitchen sink mentality of like how much can I utilize these cards to do like the most for the game,
Mhm.
which a little look behind the curtain, these used to be for this charge action that TK, if you're still there, I finally removed it from the game. um, and so like the it was sort of my design philosophy was throwing everything to then pull back, and I got to the point where I was stuck with what to do with them, and might have lost my train of thought for that. But part of that was I always had like this nagging feeling that I wanted to make sure all cards were playable, and I just didn't quite know how to do that. And so, why I wanted to show the spreadsheet today to the audience was not only to kind of show like how I like just through trial and error got to what it is today, but when my first thing I did when I got into that stuck moment of like how to balance games was look to see what content's already out there. And a lot of people like talk through the process but don't show like the what's behind
Right.
the I feel like there's so many times that I've clicked on a video where it's all talk about a spreadsheet and there's like or how to balance it and there's no actual like practice. It's all like hypothetical. And so I want to preface that what I show today is probably not the right way to do it, but this is just what I did and what I learned from it. So I am no way claiming that this is the right way to try and balance games, but
And six people run away.
uh,
Spreadsheet, yes.
but I hit that point where I wanted to maybe not fully balance the game, but I just wanted to be aware of like I wanted to see what the game was showing from a numbers perspective. And I'm
Hmm.
not the biggest number. I'm sorry. I'm gonna hide my clutter.
And TK says, "Does that mean my name gets to be on the box?" Uh
Oh
oh.
yeah, TK, you're gonna be part of the lead play tester, isn't it? Don't worry.
Yeah, your name's gonna be everywhere. Like 15 places on the back of the box.
I'm gonna borrow from Jamie. I love how Jamie utilizes the inside of the bottom box to like give
Oh,
credit
that's
where
so
credit's
cool.
due.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know. Am I sharing the spreadsheet at this point?
You are now. There we go.
Ah, there we go. So I had gotten to the point where playtest was going really well, but it was sort of because there's so much going on in the game. I didn't know if like I was pulling this lever to like it would mess up like 90 other things in the game. Probably being dramatic, but I didn't know where to like troubleshoot the problem. So for me, part of the whole putting it into a spreadsheet helped um, just give me a map, even if I was looking at it upside down. And so uh, I started with the idea of like what we're looking at right now is the key that everything's based on. Because in my head, I didn't want to just like plug in numbers and not be able to like have it like show what the output of like a tangible action is. So I spent the extra time to create a tab showing not only the costs of different cards in the game, but what now is like the bonuses you get for discarding a card, and ended up with actions like what each action equates to as a value. And I'm sure looking at it right now, it's like, why are you going to decimal points and things like that? Um, because at first I knew that in the game the most common resource is the yellow resource. Um, so like let's just put that as one and build off of it. And the other bookend number that I had to start with was figuring out what in my head a reputation point would be worth. And so I think we talked about this pre-show, but the impetus around trying to create Everstone was to give a crunchy game that you could play in a game night. And in my head, that was like, okay, 100 points worth of like 100 points worth is like a game night. And so I was like, okay, you need 10 reputation points to win. So let's set them at 10 apiece, and then kind of went from there. And
Hey,
so,
quickly, may I,
yep.
if before we get in any further, can you just tell people what you told me earlier, the brief of the game, just so they have some
Oh yeah,
context?
yeah,
So
yeah, sure. So Everstone, which is the art behind me, but we're looking at numbers right now that you can't see, is so Everstone is a game all about exploration and discovery, and the goal for it was that something that could give you a refreshing mind puzzle that wasn't too taxing and heavy within like a weeknight of just you could play after dinner, from a solo to four-player count and have just as much fun within the same time frame was sort of like my design goals. And based around that, so in the game, it's a engine building game where it utilizes these multi-use cards that you will build out under your player board to create almost this one engine that has like four different sub engines that you can build out, as well as there are so that's the main pitch. It's an action sequencing game where you're racing to get 10 reputation points first. And so if you kind of look down to the bottom left where there's kind of the reference of the player board, uh, you'll be taking turns moving your character within your cart to perform the main action, and then as you build out this engine and repair these relics that you find, you'll be able to run the action sequence that is below where your character is for the turn.
Cool.
So that is sort of what Everstone is known as now. And so it got to the point with, there's going to be about 80 cards that are all multi-use cards in the game at this point. And all of them were fun, but I was starting to have gameplays where, player one would win in 10 turns and player two would only end in 2 victory points, and that never felt fun.
Yeah.
And
That would be
so
me.
I was trying to decipher, well, like, you could make the assumption, oh, okay, player one's just a more experienced gamer, but I didn't like making that assumption. And so for me, I wanted to source if there were cards that were creating those like cascading runaway victors. And so it started with trying to see if someone, like, reaching out to see if there were balancers out there. And the one that I reached out and you know contracted somebody to do like the framework of this, and he did a really good job pointing out like the process and like teaching me just from learning about his process how to go about like getting down to like the root of starting. But the agreement that we had, like the amount of work that I wanted to have done, I didn't have the budget for, so I just tried to start doing it myself, which
It's the best
ended
way to
up
do it, honestly.
with this guy. And so I started at like the simplest point of like, what is the most simple thing in the game? Let's assign that a 1 value, which I believe is probably, is it this guy? Equals B12. Weird. So they equal each other. Sorry. And so starting with the 1 and bookmarking what the end game it should be worth was how I started. So I just put winning the game at 100 and kind of worked from each end to go in between. As you can see now, it's not 100. It's and so then I start working back. It's like, okay, well, I don't have to keep this at 100. You need 10 reputation points to win. So it's really, make that 10 and then multiply that by the reputation points needed to win. Where some of the simple formulas that I started building out. And I don't know if this is too granular for the audience or too granular for you, Devin, and we can go high level. But
Yeah.
I started at the, plugging in numbers until I found a formula that didn't need to have me make assumptions. And so once I had sort of what the different key numbers that I was going off that I wanted to play with, I then started to build out the fun, colorful one that is the currently 75 relics that are in the game. And so what it started as was just assigning what their cost was. And so if we look here, there's 3 different resources in the game, and then there's a wild, and didn't have the factor at first, and then there's influence, which would be the technically 4th resource. And so I just threw in all of those numbers here and then tried to do as best I could to create whatever the sell reward was. So for, something that is, again, stop me if I'm rambling or going way off the
I'm kind of
rails
just
here.
looking at this like this is way over my head, so I have no clue what I'm looking at. I'm trying to analyze it all as we're going through here.
And
How
so
long did this take to make?
Maybe 20 hours collectively, but it didn't
Okay.
it didn't start this built out. Like you
Yeah.
can put the things that like the card number is technically not necessary but helpful for me. That came later when I was looking at like, the mystical chalice, and then I had to go looking for that number. It sped things up to just assign a number to a card and then put it on the card for like switching back and forth. So it didn't really, it started as just what the cost was for the card, and that was literally just number of resources at the beginning.
Yeah.
What the reward was, and so some rewards you have to pay an additional. So this one, like that's in my camera, that costs a yellow resource. So if it cost a resource or anything like that, I was able to throw it in. And I know if you look at the key up here, um, I built it out where in my head I wanted to be able to use this for future expansions if there is like if the audience like enjoys the game enough, I wanted to build a tool that was expandable.
Yeah.
But what this is doing is it's just linking back to that key of it's a so it was a one wild resource is what it cost. Um, was all it was saying here. But all these just started out as like the intrinsic value to just see if the spreadsheet would work. Um,
So if you're someone like me who is brand new to this, the balancing thing, I have my own way of doing it. It's not as
yep.
fun and fancy as what you got. But if you're like brand new to this and you're like, what do I do? Is there like a set process of like where you should start in your game? Because yours is obviously going to be different than the next designer. So like, is there a
Yep.
process of like start to finish, like what you need to focus on first?
Um, well, I'll say I still feel that I am a novice balancer as well. So it just this was my brain going probably way too in the weeds that I needed to it for it, but it
Hmm.
gave me that comfort level of that I could see in two columns what the value of the card was compared to all the others, and then what its value cost was based off of like how expensive it was. Um, like, I'm sure there's plenty of designers that are much more renowned and that have a completely different process. But
Yeah.
the balancing process for me was I couldn't move past the fact that I had to make assumptions that cards were balanced, and I didn't want to make assumptions. And
Mm.
so it started out with the cost, which is now what, 7 columns, started out as one, where it was just sort of the reason, like the thinking, trying to think about the card or whatever you're trying to balance in the simplest way possible. Of if there are two options for, we'll just use, and we can probably move the numbers away for right now.
Okay.
I'll stop sharing, or if yeah, I'll just keep it on in the background. Um, but for me, it was to try and create the simplest math problem possible. And so in Everstone, there's a one-time bonus that you can gain from selling, or there's an ongoing bonus based on the number of times that you take in the action. And so in my head, the thought was, okay, the value of this and this averaged, if that divided by its cost, all of those should equal one or be like proportionate to one another. Because if
Yeah.
you have something that's really strong, um, you want it to cost more, but you don't want like you don't need them all to like be equal to one another, but you want them within a range. Was sort of um, my process because I like the games that if you can leverage the min maxing to your advantage, you deserve to win if you're playing a highly competitive game like that. Uh, and so that was the simple like figure out what the math problem that you want to create to balance it off of. And so for me, it may not be the right one for all games, but for Everstone, it felt like you have two options when you repair it. And so if you average those out, you have a baseline number. And if you divide that by what the cost is, that should be within the ballpark. And so for my balancing scores, I try and have that within um, a range of like two. I think
Mm.
I think 3.5 is the average value of cost that I'm trying to get at, which is like the reason I came to that number, and it may not be the right one, is that on average, I wanted the costs to be around that 3 resource number. So between I think 2 and 6 is like the range. So that just felt like the right number for me, and it may end up not being, but it's sort of that was the framework of like, hey, that's enough to get me to move forward,
Yeah.
and so that would be the start, and
Yeah, I
to
feel like
get
too many designers like try and balance. Like for me, I can't balance all at once. I need to balance one card at a time because otherwise, like if I try to do all at once, then after I'm playtesting, well, then individual cards are going to start being like, well, that's not balanced. So for me, I do one card at a time, and very much
mm,
like I do simpler games, a lot simpler games than what you've got going on. So like all of mine, every time I do it's like averages. Like I need point values to average out to 15 for all of my cards. So then just like you were doing, like I put 5 here and 6 here, and do the math that way. But for me, it's like I found the more efficient way to do it is just making sure all of the cards individually can work themselves, and then bringing them into the whole. It's a lot easier and faster. Does that work for you as well?
Well, I know we're tackling them from different angles, but
Yeah.
both of us at the start of balancing had an objective in mind.
Right.
And so, like, whether it's, you know, we both want to start at A and end at Z. And so you might go alphabetical order.
Hmm.
My brain works where I like to jump around and the alphabet doesn't look like the alphabet. But I think that's the biggest takeaway for like not only designers, but people looking to like, create a mark that you're trying to hit, whether
Yeah.
it's like and make that mark controllable. And so where yours was, you need them all to equal that one number.
Hmm.
Um, like that's a perfect way to look at it and to move forward. And there was like I did the same sort of thing with the actions that you take in the game, like the four main actions. I wanted them to be around that like the you should be getting like at this point I think it's six or something like that, but I wanted them all to be uh, of that same value. And so like sometimes like that sticking the number um, because it seems to be playing the best is like a great way to go about it as well.
Okay. I have a few
The
community questions here.
Yeah, go for it.
Let's see. I think I'm going to use this. I'm going to just copy it and paste it in here so it's easier to see. Okay. This is a long one, but Brandon asks, in a game with an economy of some kind, how do you price cards based on multiple ability choices? One ability may be worth the price while the other is not, so only one ability will ever be used on that card.
So I think if we want to switch back to the spreadsheet,
Sure.
um, I had the same sort of dilemma when jumping into this. So there are I believe what you're asking is so like I'll speak to Everstone because that's the only thing I know. But I believe you're asking if like the sell reward, this one here will give you an instant like a value of not 9 and 15. Like the 15 one seems like it's always going to be the better one, so that's not a choice. I wanted to be able to easily see that, so I was looking at like the value difference,
Mm.
and so that was what created this U column here of just being able to go through and I'll give a caveat of that at this point, none of the cards have been fully tweaked. This is just the tool that I use to look at them
Hmm.
because I don't strictly go off these numbers. But the value difference was able to help me quickly see like, okay, this card 28 should give you a tough choice more times than not because the approximate value for each one, like if it should all of them should be zero if they're all evenly balanced.
Right.
And that was just taking what the difference was between the value of the one time versus the value of the the relic. And so for the ongoing abilities, kind of what this is showing here was never knowing when the cards are going to come up in the deck was like you don't want to balance everything off of like just having it at the start because if it comes in like a later game it might not be picked was sort of the nut that I haven't been able to crack yet. But for that I started to track how many turns the game was taking, and because the action system is set up where you can't take the same action twice, um, I ended up with about 15 turns is what the average game like you will take in an average game of Everstone. And because you can't take the same action twice in a row, max you're going to be able to take what 7.5. So call it 8 of the same action, which I then was like, okay, half of 8 is 4 because half the time you'll get it early, half the time you'll get it late. So that's some of like the simpler numbers that I've been putting to like bookend it was how I built this out. But can you pop up the question again? Because I I talked
Yeah, I
myself in
think
a circle there with Brandon.
I think you answered it. I think you answered it pretty well there. I think he's talking about he has multiple options or choices on his card. So like, let's say if you have three ways to use your card, but on that card there's two different options as well. It's like, how do you balance that out?
Okay, yeah, and
He said
so
yes, so I don't know what
oh,
to say
perfect.
yes to, but
And I guess to close that thought, once I had this value number, I was then able to see, which cards have the craziest choice difference. And like I just started working backwards, similar to Devin, your process of one at a time. I just work at the
yeah,
the most egregious ones and pull them closer to like try and bring that margin of difference closer.
okay, yeah. I
And
want to
then
talk
some I
about your
ignore because I enjoy them.
yeah. I want to talk about like your. I'm going to close off the spreadsheet for right now.
Okay.
your your gut feeling. You had mentioned, this is also a question that he had. It's like, how do you have a gut feeling about balance? I know, like, the first time I did it, my gut feeling was just like, I don't know. So I put crazy numbers out, and then as I've progressed as a designer, I'm starting to get that gut feeling of like, oh, to balance this out, I'm not a developer by any means yet, but like, I'm like, okay, this has to be five. If this is five, well, then that's probably going to be eight or something like that. So can you like talk about how that gut feeling is, and how do you go about doing stuff like that?
Uh, So I think it's still times like ties back into that core philosophy of like set what you're trying to drive towards and then like head towards it. And
Mhm.
so like once I had all of the like the craziness of the spreadsheet, like I had to walk away from it too because it's just a lot of
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
numbers to like yeah. And
Yeah.
so luckily I've had time with it, so it doesn't scare me off as much anymore. But it was one of those things where this is what it's showing me. I'm not going to be rash and just try and make them all equal, but it's like then look at things on a case by case basis. And it was sort of with that original goal in mind of like I don't want to do anything to slow down the game. um, when it comes to like balancing cards, like a really strong card, I could choose to make it like cost more to be able to like pay for it. But that inevitably will slow the game down because you need to get more resources to be able to repair it. And so, like, I think that's sort of where I would call like the gut instinct coming in of there's probably four or five different ways to solve like the numbers once you have them. And when I'm using my gut, it's sort of, looking at the criteria of what I'm just trying to design around, which we'll call our design principles
Mhm.
of, what makes you as a designer, whether you're published, unpublished, or like what you drive or like build as your cornerstones. And then my gut is sort of like that compass that tries to point to those. Is sort of how I'll end up making gut decisions. I think uh, one kind of decision that came to mind is early on in like the prototypes. Uh, the gate playtests were lasting like I would end up calling them after 2 hours just because no one was like even close to like
Yeah.
the end game state, and there was like enough bugs that I had picked up where I was like, I don't want to lose these nice people that are like willing to give me their
Right.
time and energy. Um, but it was like my gut kept telling me that like no one was focusing on movement of the game,
Mhm.
and my gut for some reason was just talking like telling me that like the movement around the board is going to be what is the piece that kind of ties it all in, where everyone was sort of focused on building their own engine. And at the time I didn't know it, but I think what my gut was telling me, like if you only isolate and focus on like the people who bring cards into their engine and repair them there, it started like I think my gut was just saying that it sort of becomes like the luck of how you pick up the cards, and
Mhm.
that there's no way to like kind of slightly engage with the other person to slow them down enough. Which some of the feedback I was getting early on before the in-house play testing with like close friends and things like that, um there were some like heated discussions of like me trying to like actively put more, like I was like I think I need to make two of the actions move like or some form of movement, and there was like slight pushback from the audience that I was playing with at the time, but like it ended up working out.
Yeah, I want to. This is a really interesting point Brandon brings up. Is he says cards don't always need to be perfectly balanced, and some cards can't really be numerically classified. At least in my design so far, I love that idea of because like we're talking about heavy balance, right? Like we're talking about everything's balanced here, according to that average or whatever.
Yeah.
But I have definitely like you definitely need sometimes where there's not balance, and there's like that chaos sometimes of like if a card's not balanced, it makes for crazy games. Um, I I'm reminded of the Epic card game from Star Realms. Like
Okay. Yep.
they're they're balanced, but they all seem like they're totally not balanced, with each other. And so like every card you play is so powerful, and you're just like breaking the game and doing crazy stuff like that. And so I want to know your thoughts on like, does everything need to be perfectly balanced, or how many cards don't need to be balanced together and whatnot?
I think I would agree with the initial statement of like that. Like, I don't think everything has to be balanced. One of my favorite things growing up was playing Hearthstone online, and I'd use
Yeah.
just very RNG heavy decks because of the crazy sequences where you'd like pull out cards that you weren't supposed to have in that class, and like that's always been in my enjoyment. So like
Mhm.
balance in a game where everything can be put into a spreadsheet and you're just looking at it like is not fun to me.
Yeah.
Um, I do think you can give a number to everything though, if you like spend enough time to it. And so for a while, I had mechanics that um, just did like silly things where you were like claiming rewards that were on other people's boards and things like that. And at the start, like when the spreadsheet was maybe, you know, 10 columns wide, I had no idea like what to give that number for. So
Yeah.
I would just highlight the cell blank and kind of move forward. And eventually, when I had sort of like, um, I sat and thought on it for a while, it's like the cards that have the um, sort of use like gain a cell reward from an opponent's storage was like, oh well, why don't I just assign that number like the average cell reward like number? And so because once the numbers slowly started populating in, I could just create the formula, average the column. And so I think to Brendan's point, like you're correct. Like maybe their cell rewards are all things that'll get you like 3 victory points for free,
Mhm.
and other times, like it'll just be like you actually lose more than you gain. That's technically not balanced, but the average use of it falls within like the scope of like the numbers that I'm trying to hit. So in
Mhm.
my mind, it's like there will probably be one of those two plays where somebody wins because they're able to find that sequence. But part of like what I was trying to build around was like to give players that opportunity to find it. And so the goal is that you can't make those opportunities present themselves like infinitely or like every game, but 1 or 2 games, me as a designer, I'm okay with that because
Yeah,
it creates a fun story.
reminded of the silver bordered cards in Magic. Like I don't remember what they're called, like unstable or something like that. But they're balanced in the entire realm of things, but they're just do crazy things that make it seem like it's not balanced at all. And I'm sure there's some that aren't balanced at all. Like there's a reason they're silver bordered, because you can't legally play them. But they're just like things like that, and I've seen in other games that just like make for crazy game experiences. And Benny says, I like multiple use cards. They're fun, like Seven Wonders. I think it's a very clever way to minimize components. Have you played Seven Wonders?
I have Seven Wonders is great.
I
It's
played the dual version, but not the original. Can you like tell me more about that?
so if I'm remembering correctly, the I've played a lot more It's a Wonderful World than Seven Wonders at this point because
Okay.
that's sort of like the but if I'm remembering correctly, and was it Benny that said it?
Yes, Benny.
You might be able to explain uh, how the game's the multi-use function of them a little better, but you like the ability to discard them for the currency in the game or to tuck them under your player board for activating certain I'm gonna butcher what the term is, but the abilities of like the board that you're playing on top of like each card having like a different thing that you're playing around gives you that like fun fascination of you know different avenues that you can push, like where if you're playing a really heavy science game, others will have to like look out for it
Yeah.
because you don't want to like give you the free science win. So maybe like what I've enjoyed from I believe I've played it 3 times, or like around that number, maybe not three exactly, but was the ability of when you have to kind of hate draft in those style of games, it doesn't diminish your chance of winning. I think
Mm,
7 Wonders does a really good job at that because you have the ability to like flip it for just money, or you can tuck it under your board. I believe that's the main uses that I remember in terms of the cards, but I always enjoyed that puzzle.
yeah, I want this question to be asked because I'm curious of your answer. Is like we talked earlier about how many things are on cards. So like in your opinion, what should be like the limit of how many uses a card can have? Like, is there a limit, or is it max out at a certain amount? And then what is like the most you've done?
I think the limit would be based on the audience that you're trying to design for
Mm,
in my head. So if you're trying to design a family game, like I think 2 is like plenty because it that's just not the demographic that like if there's 3 options that it just sounds like it would bog the game down a ton. Whereas if you're like looking for sort of that upper echelon of like the 4 or 5s, like as long as you're doing it in a like not just adding them for like adding sake, but
right.
if you can tie them in, like I don't know, I think it'd be really cool to see like cards that have 7 or 8 different uses. Like if you can figure all that out.
That is a lot. I'm just thinking about that. Like I know there's been some cool 18 card games lately that I've been seeing in that. I know Button Shy has one where there's like 5 or 6 different uses for a card, and it's just like fascinating to me. 18 cards and then also like 6 different uses on each card. That's just crazy. I mean, but yeah, I love how you said that you tied that into like the marketing side of it. It's like know your audience, right?
Mhm.
It's like if you're designing for kids, well, 6 is going to be just like too much. Like they just can't do it. You know, half the time I can't even do that. So it's like, but
Because
yeah,
I think I'd
go ahead.
say like the one of the ones that I'd pay homage to of like the best multi-use cards that I've seen in action is in Bruges. I don't know if you've
Sure.
played.
I've never played.
Um, but that like the I bel I'm probably gonna misquote it, but I think there's like probably 6 different things that you can do with a card because it's color dependent, and so you're using them as a resource to discard to take different card abilities. They all have their own unique action as like a citizen if you build them, and then in order to build them, you need to like build a plot for them of like the matching color. So like they even work as like the place to build out into, and so the like I think that's done really well because like half of the uses are built around just having this color economy, and
Yeah.
so it like I don't know if you define that as like how many uses they would be is just like the different actions you can use them for if they're just a
Mhm.
resource. But I think when you made comments on Button Shy, uh, the multi-use cards that you utilize the back of the card, I think is such a like there's so much design like space
Yeah.
to like fully capitalize on that. Like um, Circle the Waglands and like their Agropolis, Agricola, no, not Agricola, Agropolis and Sprawlopolis. Sorry, like the ability for like not only like the back is scoring, so you can have 18 different scoring like that. I think that's just so clever. Um,
Yeah, I love how Radlands does it. I mean, it's a subtle thing, but that when I read that rule book and I first played the game with the punks being like an
mhm.
actual thing in the game, I was blown away. Like I remember dropping the rule book and I'm like, that is the coolest thing. Like because I at that point I've never played any games that had like a multi-use type that situation. So when I could play a punk that was also something on the other side, I was like, that's so cool. Like that's such a small thing, but it really makes for like you said the design space is so large. And
And they're like, I think where they have that like discard bonus.
yeah.
I drew a ton of inspiration from that because if you're like the actions that you get to provide with them is really it's so, almost like that temptress action because especially with Radlands, like the card economy is so tight where
Oh yeah.
you don't want to like just end up top decking because that's how you'll end up losing. So it's like that
Winning
like
every game.
decision of like trying to like hold off the temptation to like use it because you can weather the storm, but it's going to get like hairy. Um, like that on top of like the fact that that shared deck being the punks, I was like, there's so much like chef's kiss for like the what
Right.
Roxley did with the
Right.
Redlands.
Um, we got another community question here. I think I know the answer, but I want to ask anyway. So, how do
Okay.
you decide if you want to multi-use cards as like the main focus of your game, or if you want to do it more as a supporting mechanism? And then in your game, is it the main focus or supporting or what?
I would make the argument that it's probably the main focus. Like it's an old prototype now, but there's a board that you're moving around that has there's like this influence track puzzle that you're also playing with as well with the harvest mechanic. But everything ties back into the like the relics are sort of that focal point of like how you need to navigate towards the victory. And I wouldn't necessarily say that I wanted it to be the main focus, but once that was sort of like what was opening up the enjoyment for the other assets, that was where I put my main focus and energy on because that was like the engine of the game at that point, like literally from an engine building
Yeah.
standpoint. But it was like what drove everything else. Because I don't know if I've shared it, but the mechanic that actually started it all was I had played Can't Stop at like a family friend gathering, and that whole decision of like rolling the dice and choosing like how to split them up was like
Mm.
so enjoyable and like addictive, like with the push your luck
Yeah.
aspect to it, that I wanted to see that element in like a heavier game that had a little more variant in sort of like the like I had started with saying I'm not a narrative person, but the emergent narrative in games is always like fun for me as a gamer. So it
Mhm.
started with the dice, and I was like, how can I bring that concept of rolling and then choosing from what you roll into a heavier game and add that emergent narrative. And the cards was sort of where I fell into as like my comfort zone of
Mm.
design.
So, what do you think is like the hardest part of designing multi-use cards?
For me personally, is paring back.
Mm.
And honestly, like if I'm going to take back that answer, is the hardest is like just having the ambition to jump into them. Because for what like no one will ever see is like the time that it was spent stuck in my head and not on paper and not like brought to people or talked about. It was sort of just it was all up here, and like that the hardest part was just like getting it onto paper
Mhm.
because multi-use sounds ambitious and scary, and like there's a lot
Overwhelming.
of there's a lot of like, oh, that's a crazy idea, I'm not like, so that I think would be the like the real answer I'd give. But from like an actual like um testing and play testing prototyping development answer, it would be uh being cognizant of the changes you make,
Mm.
how it affects the other parts of the cards. And so I
Yeah,
don't
you're
know
gonna
if that
change
was
one
too
thing, and then
vague.
that's gonna change a million other things.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
like everything could be predicated around like you know you set up the cost structure of the cards, and then if you go and change that and you're not like observant or like kind of, if you're not looking at the whole pie, like you got to keep looking at the whole pie for them. And
Yeah.
sort of it's, I think why with the multi-use cards it's hard for me to just go one at a time, in the sense that I'm just like hyper cognizant it might take more time to get to the end point by like slowly tweaking different parts. But um in one of the earlier iterations of the game, I had like heavily invested like one part that got like cut out. And it wasn't the part that TK suggested. Like, it came out way before um, like it even like was to like public open play testing,
Mhm.
and that time sync there made me very apprehensive to just like focus on one part of the card at a time. And so if you don't have the mind for being able to like bounce and have that like ADD brain,
Mm.
which I have, it can be a real challenge to like continue that ambition to like work them out.
Yeah, I'm reminded of like the balance in like, for example, HeroScape, making your armies. And there's always that coin, the points or whatever you need. Well, that's a great way to balance, right? Because it's like if someone has this crazy dragon worth 300
Mhm.
points, I mean, they only get like a few other heroes here and there. And I didn't realize that was so important until because I've played HeroScape since forever, like since I was a kid. And I didn't realize up until like a year and a half ago that the points were really like when I started game design, the points were really there for a reason. we were always just like play what we want to play. It's
Yeah.
like, and then the games were crazy, like unbalanced, and usually there was just times where we just wiped each other out entirely. And I mean, we played the first game with actually doing points, and then we were like, oh my gosh, we were so close. Like it was so
Hmm.
much better because we were pretty close because we followed the balance the correct way. So balance is crucial, to game design, and that's why blind playtesting I think is crucial as well, because you get to see what players are interacting with and what cards as well. But um, let's
I
see, I'm
think
gonna.
that is probably a good point to highlight of like you have to understand the framing in which you're trying to balance, because
Mhm.
if you have like the Deathwalker 9000
Oh
and
god,
all I have is
tiny little
yeah, whatever
skulls,
like it's just one
Maro.
Morrow tribe. Like
Yeah.
that's not a fair fight. So like in terms of like 1-to-1, they're not balanced. But in terms of like the framing of okay, like this is the army you're built. Like you want to make sure that, like the framing of everything's balanced. And
Hmm.
so like one thing that I realized in my journey of like it's not even balancing, but just looking at the numbers is that if you have an action that's worth 3, 5, 7, and 9, and I have those same actions, the actions themselves don't have to be balanced because we have equal opportunity to them. But like if you have a card that you gain that is like super broken and I don't, that's sort of where the imbalance can come to be a problem because we don't have equal access to that if we're drawing from like the deck. If
Right.
I think I'd say Dune Imperium had like their market and is a really cool way of showing balance with like not all the card like everyone has an equal opportunity at some level where you can pass early to get the really strong card.
Mm.
So like when you have markets and things like that, I think there's a little more wiggle room. But like in Radlands, if you're just drawing from the deck, you want to really make sure that the balance there is a little more tight, just because it could come down to you just drawing the most powerful card in the game.
Yeah.
And if me as a player, I never have access to that, um, I'm going to feel hosed at the end of the game, and it may affect me wanting to even play the game again if like that one.
Right.
And so that's what I'm super cognizant about, like figuring out like the whole of what I'm trying to balance.
Awesome. Well, we're coming up on the close here. That was a great chat. I loved. I hope you guys enjoyed the spreadsheets. I know that's not always the most fun, but I think that was really helpful for some aspects. Is learning how balance does happen. And the development side of it is not easy. I mean, there's a lot to it. You could be a good game designer, but the balancing and developing is really what precedes and makes a game great. So this is your last couple minutes. I'm going to pop up some stuff. Go ahead and tell us about Everstone more. Promote it a little bit. Tell us about your website and more about the game.
I I'd actually just want to throw out that if there was anyone watching live or like that is watching the rebroadcast, uh, please reach out to me. I'm happy to be like that second brain to talk through, be like building out some of that spreadsheet.
Yeah.
I can't promise that it'll be right, but I can get a little more in depth of like specifically for like wherever you're stuck, how you might be able to like find those numbers to figure
Mhm.
out like them as the guy. Like I would love to help in any way I can, like because that was a big rejuvenator for me. Was the 2 hours that it took the first day to get things on paper felt like very demoralizing. But once I had sunk the time into it, this has truly just been a compass for me to like that has like sped up my game design. And
Yeah.
so I would love to help provide that for anyone that feels stuck in that same spot.
Awesome. And now I know. Now I know this is what you do. I can send people to you as well. So if anyone's asking me, I can be like, "Okay, tag. There you go."
Yeah, just downplay it because the proof will be in a couple years. But
He's the best of the best. Everyone, you heard it right here. uh,
uh,
awesome. Well, tell
I'm
everyone
I'm
just
the
briefly
best
about
free can
Everstone.
afford. But Everstone is probably it's the game that inspired me to kind of push forward and trying to bring something to market. I had a couple games that I shelved beforehand, and so it is a board game that I've built friendships around, and there's a community building sort of the IP and lore around that you can find if you go to the website or if you want to join the Discord. In a couple months, we'll start having NPCs that you can actually find in the game, taking on personalities and having conversations in there. But it's slated to launch early next year to hopefully be in people's homes by the end of 2024.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining. This was a great chat, and I hope you guys all loved that. It will be on YouTube as well. So if you didn't get to watch this live, you can go ahead and watch it later. And the final thing before we close out here is if you're in the Board Game Hype community and watching this, July is almost over. And well, you know how we do the membership awards every month. This is the game that we're going to be this is the game that I'm giving away for this month. So if you are among the top 10 memberships for this month engagement, then I'll be drawing out of those 10 names. So awesome. Until next time, next week, we'll be talking with Bob of One Board Family. And yeah, we'll be talking about Origins and then our experience here coming for Gen Con. So we'll see you later. Sam, we'll talk to you later.
Have a good one, everyone.
Awesome.